When we first read poetry, we usually approach it looking for an emotional experience. We scan the lines for a story, a feeling, or a moment of clarity. But literary criticism requires a different set of tools. To truly understand how a text operates, we have to stop reading for the narrative and start analyzing its underlying code. The common instinct is to treat language like a clear window pane. We look straight through the words on the page, assuming they simply point to a stable, objective reality on the other side. Poststructuralism identifies that every forest or night sky described in poetry exists as a synthetic assembly of signifiers. Language constructs a textual world rather than reflecting a pre-existing one. To demonstrate how this machinery works, we will examine two sonnets that appear to document profound natural experiences, The Lantern Carved from Night and The Green Testament. We will run these texts through two rigorous critical frameworks. By applying Peter Barry's three-step deconstructive model to the first poem and Catherine Belsey's poststructuralist approach to the second, we will systematically expose how textual unity is an illusion maintained entirely by linguistic scaffolding. Understanding literature at an advanced level requires transitioning from treating a poem as a vessel of truth to analyzing it as an unstable machine of signifiers. We begin with Peter Barry's three-step deconstructive model. Barry's first step is the verbal stage, where we look past the apparent message of the text to locate internal paradoxes and contradictions at the level of individual words. On a first read, The Lantern Carved from Night projects a sense of existential harmony. The speaker seemingly finds peace in nature, but the specific word choices the poet uses immediately sabotage this premise. Consider the phrase silent echoes. An echo is strictly defined by the presence of sound. By attaching the adjective silent, the poem destroys the property that makes an echo exist in the first place. The signifier and its modifier cancel each other out. This friction continues throughout the text. When the speaker notes that the pine breathed incense, the poem collapses the distinction between the physical wilderness and artificial religious ritual. Nature is suddenly given the sacred, manufactured properties of a church. This reversal of conventional categories aligns closely with other modernist techniques, specifically echoing Dylan Thomas's own rhetorical subversion, where darkness is privileged over light and fire becomes a gentle, healing force. At this basic verbal level, the language works against its own intent. The metaphors undermine the certainty and existential belonging they attempt to promise the reader. Moving beyond individual words, Barry's second step is the textual stage. Here, we zoom out to look for larger structural discontinuities, omissions, and abrupt ideological shifts within the poem's architecture. The sonnet hinges on a volta at line 9, but then I learned. This pivot masquerades as a natural resolution to the speaker's prior anxiety. In reality, it represents a massive structural fault line. The psychological event that caused this transformation is entirely suppressed. The poem offers no evidence to explain how the speaker arrived at this newfound clarity. The certainty is declared by the author, but it is never earned by the narrative. This brings us to Barry's final step, the linguistic stage. This targets moments where the poem accidentally exposes its complete reliance on rhetoric, questioning its own ability to communicate objective truth. The speaker boldly claims, "The stars need not explain." The irony is deep. The entire sonnet functions as an elaborate explanation of the speaker's emotional state. The poem argues against explanation while simultaneously explaining itself. The discrepancy between the title and the text reveals how meaning is deferred. The Lantern Carved from Night promises a central symbol that literally never appears in the poem, proving that the subject remains permanently absent. Barry's framework reveals that the poem's apparent philosophical victory relies on skipped logical steps, absent symbols, and a dependence on the figurative language it claims to transcend. To analyze our second text, The Green Testament, we will pivot to Catherine Belsey's framework. Rather than hunting for paradoxes, Belsey asks how language actively produces meaning. Belsey's foundational rule is the primacy of the signifier. The imagery in a poem functions as a carefully curated network of signs, not as a transparent report on a real-world location. Nature exists here only as a linguistic construct. Take the opening terms: emerald, dawn, and crystal. The poem isolates these words to generate specific cultural associations: wealth, purity, and spiritual awakening. It removes them from the dirt and complexity of physical botany. Notice what is absent from this environment. There is no decay, no disease, no dead leaves, and no violence. The language creates an idealized text by omitting the realities of a functioning ecosystem. This artificial linguistic purification shares DNA with the hyper-curated, imaginary landscapes constructed by modernist poets like William Carlos Williams, where subjects are rendered spotlessly perfect. The reader feels they are experiencing a walk through nature, but they are actually navigating an illuminated manuscript forged entirely out of highly selective vocabulary. Belsey notes that this artificial reality generates profound meaning not through literal definitions, but through the unexpected juxtaposition of entirely unrelated signifiers. Ezra Pound utilized this method, proving that forcing two disparate visual images next to one another in text forces the mind to bridge the gap, creating a new, synthetic concept. The Green Testament relies heavily on this grammar. The text forcibly equates leaves to pages and labels the wind as a faithful tutor. These pairs are visually convincing. Their structural proximity alone dictates that the reader must view nature as literature and God as an author, without providing actual argument or evidence for the claim. This persuasion is further amplified by Julia Kristeva's concept of the semiotic. Kristeva argues that poetry uses rhythm and phonetic sound patterns to bypass rational logic and manipulate emotion directly. The poem is flooded with soft consonants and slow vowel repetitions: sweet berries stained, burden of my tread, crystal brooks. This precise phonetic engineering manufactures an artificial sense of calm that validates the speaker's spiritual claims before the rational brain can process them. The poem's power is mechanical. It stems from geometric grammar and calculated sonic repetition, not from a profound observation of the physical world. Examining the poem's conclusion allows us to uncover the hidden authority, or hegemony, operating behind the text. The speaker claims to receive wisdom from the environment, but nature never literally speaks the phrase, "every seeming loss could mend." The poet takes human language and forcibly attributes it to the wind. This rhetorical ventriloquism places the poet as the supreme translator. Despite the speaker's humble posture, the poem renders nature completely mute and dependent entirely on human mediation to hold any meaning. This culminates in an aporia, a theoretical dead end. The poem ends by placing endless hope within a mortal heart. This is a paradox incapable of literal verification. It exists permanently as an unresolvable metaphor. The poem's text exerts absolute linguistic dominance over the natural world, functioning as an exercise in rhetorical power, regardless of its posture of humble learning. When we place both poems side by side, we can see how linguistic systems operate as a massive shifting network. They continuously promise absolute truth and continuously delay its arrival. Both texts share a specific failure. The central truth is never clearly defined. It is constantly displaced onto a rotating cast of metaphors: stars, pages, echoes, and unseen lanterns. Jacques Derrida defined this phenomenon as différance. It is the principle that absolute meaning is never fully present in language. It is always postponed, deferred endlessly down a chain of subsequent signifiers. A naive reading tells us these poems capture a moment of spiritual harmony in the woods. The rigorous reality of the deconstructed text shows us something different. Poetic syntax and grammatical evasion generate the existential answers that the naive reader attributes to nature. These post-structuralist frameworks give us precise tools for analysis. Peter Barry's model identifies the specific paradoxes and missing structural steps that fracture a narrative from within. Catherine Belsey's approach reveals the mechanics of construction, showing how carefully arranged signifiers curate highly artificial, idealized realities through omission and forced juxtaposition. Applying these critical methods does not destroy literature. Instead, it dismantles its architecture to expose the brilliant mechanics of how meaning is actually generated. Meaning in any text is always provisional, endlessly shifting and buckling beneath the weight of its own metaphors. Mastery of literature requires viewing the text not as a clear window to the physical world, but as a meticulously engineered machine designed to generate powerful, compelling illusions.